Yo, 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 what it do, world? We are back once again. Two POGs save the world. It's your boy, KJ Bradley, and the world's greatest chaplain, Mr. Lance O'Neill. What up, Chappie? Welcome back.
No intro music today?
No, we kind of cut through the pump and circumstance today. We just got right into it. For those of you guys that were looking for us last week, we had some personal issues. Chappie was on a flight, and I was dealing with some bugs. My kid is playing basketball at one of the youth leagues at the Y, and the whole team had snotty noses, and yeah, it was just on
Petri dishes. You know what?
Yeah.
I think you should just shut down the entire school. If they all have runny noses, then there's just no reason to take any risks, KJ. I think you know what, and you need to go get them vaccines for runny noses. And if you don't, you're a bad parent.
I know, right? Oh, speaking of vaccines, the COVID vaccine is back and it's readily available at the VA. Yeah, I did. I had to literally fight my way out of the VA, and because they were trying to force me to take the vaccine, and I couldn't get behind. Like, I got it, the first time you got me, all right, cool, I got to get it, blah blah blah. This time I'm not so sure, man. I think it's gonna, like I said, it's one of them things where it's gonna end up being like the flu vaccine, where they try to give it to you every year, and I'm not with that, man. I'm
with you. Even the flu shot to me is kind of questionable, simply because generally the flu shot is based on last year's flu virus. So you can't. They're projecting what they're hoping it's going to be, and that it will give you some immunization against the future one. And that's where, like, the COVID thing just kind of drives me bonkers at this point, because look, hey, if you have comorbidity and you are, obese, older, or have autoimmune, and you want to get the vaccine, that's absolutely fine. But if you're not older, like I'm 50, so I'm kind of, that's where it starts to barely start that creep, and then it goes 80, 60, 70, 80, So for me, I'm not obese. I don't have any autoimmune. I don't have any issues. And it's funny because when we're going to be talking about education today, that's one of those things that it's so strange that we're in a cultural place now where if you say to somebody, well, hey, I need to go do my own research, it suddenly becomes, how dare you? How dare you try to think that you can see what other people can't see? And it's like, well, wait a minute. We're the first, I really do think we're about the first time in America over the last 3-4 years where critical thinking is coming under fire. How dare you try to think for yourself? And that's, to me, a huge issue.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't think there's room in today's society for the abstract thinker. You have to pick a mob or a tribe, and you have to align your beliefs and your thoughts with that tribe. Left, right, up, or down. You got to pick one and go with it. And there's no room for compromise anymore. And like, it's weird. It's weird how we got there. So
some of the comments you've even seen in the board towards you should know better. Then what? Then sitting down and trying to have a thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with somebody about race or about money and economics or about education system, about the military, about whatever the subject may be, especially race. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why is I just, that one comment still makes me laugh. You should know better, because it's like, that's the one where it's like automatically you should know better than what?
Yeah,
I don't get that. So
it's one of those things, man. It is. We have it's really hard to explain, man. It's like, don't reach your hand across the aisle and try to compromise. Life is what it is. There's no changing. You just have to accept it and make the best of it. And I refuse to allow myself to get caught up in that mentality, man. I will always take the optimistic look, even though my personal views are extremely pessimistic, but I still believe that there's a hint of hope, right? What's that? If one isn't that the famous Bible story? If one, Lord, talking about when I can't remember the dude, man, and forgive me, Jesus, my Bible study teacher would kick my butt if
Are
she.
you talking about when Abraham said, "If I can find 50 righteous
Yeah,
men, I
yeah,
won't destroy
yeah,
Sodom and Gomorrah"? And then
yeah.
he came back and went, how about 20?" And the Lord said,
Yeah,
"Sure, go ahead, 20."
yeah.
How about 10?
There you go. Yeah,
So I love when people say, "Well, why are you praying why are you praying to God?" And if God's going to help you, He's going to help you. And that's crazy to think you would change God's mind. It's like Abraham flat out negotiated with God.
yeah.
So
Like,
yeah,
hey,
that's the whole point. So, well, one of the things about talking and conversing, and this is going to go right into our subject. Do you remember the movie Lean on Me with Morgan Freeman?
absolutely. Come
Yeah,
on, man.
where
That's
he was Joe, whatever his last name was. I'm the Batman.
Mr. Clark. Yeah, free
Yeah,
Mr.
Mr.
Clark.
Clark, right. And there was the scene where he'd finally kicked he has everybody up on the stage that are issues, and he kicks them. You're all expelled, right?
Yep.
And then they're having the meeting, and the one mother's going off, and she's the voice from the Warriors, the radio voice from the
Yeah.
Warriors.
Yeah.
And she's like, "These kids need to be in school. These kids need," and he's like, "No, I'm not going to, basically, I'm not going to sacrifice
Yeah.
all the kids that are working in this because of a few bad ones."
Yeah.
And we've tried, and what's funny about the movie is this is the type of thing that happened in real life in Philadelphia. They had a whole thing where the parents could have voted to expand the schools into school choice, and they voted it down, and like the whole school board and everybody's going, no, 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 we have to keep it how it is. It's like, your school system is failing. You
Yeah.
don't have the proficiency rate is just brutal compared to the national average. You've been doing the same thing over and over and over, but instead of trying to fix it, you just want to keep it a status quo because that's all you know.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me. We get into this idea of why not? Well, we're going to keep it how it's going. Goodness forbid we try anything different because it might not work. Well, we know that what we're doing isn't working. So trying something that might not work, okay. Look, if might work 10%, give me that, because right now 100% is not working in Philadelphia, in New York City, in a lot of these schools. And then you had on COVID, and I saw one where there was a school district, I think it was in Philadelphia, 11th, they test 8th graders and 11th graders. It was 0% were proficient in 11th grade math and 11th grade reading, and 0% in 8th grade reading and math. Like, how is that 0%? That means nobody in the entire school. It might have been district. I don't remember exactly where I read it, but it was recent. And it's like, even if it's just one school, how does that happen that an entire school fails proficiency in 8th and 11th grade? That means 2 schools, by the way. I don't get it. Yeah, it seems like it's statistically impossible, except it's not. It's not like voting. I say, when Romney lost 20,000 to 0 to Obama in 2012, my whole thing was it's statistically impossible because you can't have 20,000. 20,000 people would not vote the same way. If you put, do you want a free $10,000 when you walk out of this booth, you wouldn't get 20,000 to 0. If you said, is it wrong to kill babies and eat their brains, you wouldn't have 20,000 to 0. But somehow in one district, it's 20,000 to 0 Obama versus Romney. So, you look at some of the, and again, this is not to go re-argue the election. It's just about statistical issues, because you would have had some people going in that legitimately probably couldn't even read the name Obama or Romney and would have just marked the wrong one by accident. So anyway, let's start.
I know, right? Well, so we got, yeah, man, it's I got a couple of topics, and I know we're talking about education, but I had a couple of, it's been such a crazy news cycle, man. I wanted to see if we can kind of briefly hit a couple of these things and kind of see where it goes.
Sure.
If you're okay with freestyling and seeing. Of
Who are we
course.
talking to?
I know, right? So first and foremost, happy Hispanic Heritage Month to all my peoples out there.
Bueno.
Yeah,
Yay. Una
oh,
cerveza, por favor. I don't
I
know
did,
how to speak Spanish. I know that's one
and
word, girl,
then
please, and that's it.
I also found out today because school got out early, and then tomorrow's an admin day. Christopher Columbus's holiday is Monday. I don't know. I feel like that should have been a bigger deal, but I don't know. I forgot all about it. Like it's
Okay,
just
so this will go into the education part. There's a book that I just finished a couple weeks ago called "Lies My Teacher Told Me,"
mhm.
and ultimately, it's not necessarily against the teachers; it's against the textbook industry. That's really what it comes down to, because the guy who wrote it, I guess he did one version like 25 years ago, and then he updated it. And one of the things was Christopher Columbus. First of all, Christopher Columbus, when he came here, Indians is not a derogatory name. Indians is not a derivative of he thought he was going to India. India means indigenous. So when you say somebody's Indian in America, that means indigenous to this country. It's he was sent here from the Queen Isabella. He was Italian, Spanish. It's pretty close. Indian, indigenous. It's not. See how that works. And so it's been twisted since then that it was to India. And he was trying to find a route to India and China. But so when he gets here, he discovers whatever. They go try to find the gold. They're like, oh, hey, let's see if there's any gold. And where they landed and all that, there really wasn't any gold. So they went back and they came back the second time. Well, the second time they found gold. But what they also found was about 2,000 slaves to take back to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay to say Christopher Columbus was a slaver. But the second part of that is in the late 15th century, slavery was absolutely normal, absolutely common. So if you want to go back and say, well, Christopher Columbus was this horrible, horrible person because he came over and he ruined the Americas, that's personally, I think that's kind of silly. Because yes, there were a lot of deaths due to the indigenous population not having immunization towards the viruses that came across. It wasn't a biological war, though. That's what happened.
He did a lot of that. He did a lot of.
Yeah. And well, it wasn't on purpose. It just, that's what happened. It's like you go right now, if you were to go in to the Amazon and you found a tribe that, let's say, you discovered and they haven't had any contact with anybody, and you have somebody from Europe drop in on them, that tribe's going to get wiped out. That tribe's going to die probably 80% to 90% pretty quickly, simply because they don't have the immunization. So it wasn't done on purpose. But the other side about coming in and dominating the people, and this has happened throughout history, it doesn't matter who you are. If you were the Chinese, you dominated for centuries. If you were certain tribes in Africa, you dominated other kingdoms. If you were the Muslims, you went into, like we've talked about, you went into the Caucasus and you took slaves. That's where the word slave comes from, the Slavs. If you were the Irish or the Scots, you were slaves. So the fact that Columbus went in and took these slaves, well, okay, it's the problem is we're not taught that, and it's okay to teach that. It's also okay to say Columbus was important to the moving forward of the Americas. It's also okay to say, oh, well, that was a weird little feedback.
Yeah, it was a little bit of double switch.
But the other part of it is, and Thomas Sewell was talking about this in the book I'm currently reading. He says that China in the 1400s, 1500s, they had these huge ships, ocean-bearing ships, right? That could have gone anywhere, that were bigger than anything Columbus was going. But they went and they went towards into the Pacific. They went to Japan. They went to the other. And when they came back, the emperor was like, everywhere you're visiting, they're just heathens. So we're not going to go out. We're better than them. Why would we go out and even deal with these people? So stop sailing, stop going everywhere else. And it was this one decision. So they had the technology, they had the will, they had the ability, but they had a leader who said, no, we're not going to do it. And so what's ironic is within 100 years, Europe took off. And if China had continued what they were doing with their seafaring, they very easily could have been the ones going to Europe instead of Europe going around and Marco Polo going across it.
Yeah.
So you could have very easily had China become the dominant power in the world very easily, but because one person's decision, one emperor goes, nope, we're not going to do that, it changes the entire, and the world's like that. One guy in China, you know, the bullet in the back of the brain of Abraham Lincoln, you know, the Oppenheimer, you know, you talk about these things that happen, that one person makes one difference. And it's not that Oppenheimer was freaking brilliant. I mean, he was brilliant, yes, but he was actually better about bringing the team together and looking at where other people weren't quite as, they weren't, the people that he worked with, a lot of them were better physicists than he was. Yeah. But what he was able to do is he was able to look in between the gaps and go, wait a minute, what about this? Let's try this. Where other people are going, no, that won't work. You go, are you sure? Let's try it. So you have these individuals in these circumstances that go throughout history, and they suddenly change the course of the world. And so, you know, we talk about stuff like Christopher Columbus. He changed the world. Whether you want to admit it or not, whether you agree with what came after Christopher Columbus or not, that's beside the point. And it's okay to expand. I wish the schools would say, look, we're going to celebrate Christopher Columbus because of what he did, but let's also recognize that he did participate in the slave trade, which back then was part of the economy. And
telling the whole story is kind of where I think that's where a lot of the issue falls in the education system. Either one side wants it told one way, the other side wants it told another way, but nobody wants to tell the whole story, right? We just say,
I agree with you, but I want to ask you a question with that then. How do you tell the whole story? And what I mean by that is, if I say to you, tell me your full history in the Army, that's going to take 16 years to tell me.
Yeah.
It's impossible. So history is done with broad strokes. Are there certain things that need to be a little more fine point? Sure. But even when you're taught about, let's say, Booth shooting Lincoln, unless you go and read the books about how they captured John Wilkes Booth afterwards, you don't realize that he was on the run for like 10 days, and when he jumped off the stage, he broke his leg, and the people that helped him with the conspiracy, one of the guys that helped him got hung with him, and he was just like, I'm helping this dude. Oh, you're a Southerner? Well, so am I, so I'll help. He didn't know that Booth had actually murdered the president. And so, you know, there's other things that go along with it. So we have these little snippets of history because that's what history is. And especially at the high school level, they have to almost by definition become snippets. And part of the bigger problem is that not only there's snippets, but they're snippets in time with no purpose behind them. So in this book, it was talking about how some of the school kids, the teacher said that Washington and Jefferson and lots of the early founders were slaveholders. And they were like, no. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. And I need a hug from my daughter. She's going to sleep. Okay. Good night.
Why is your
Bye.
crying like that?
Just it is. And so, you know, the students got mad. Like, well, no. They wouldn't have been slaves, or else it would be in the book. So this teacher, she was smart. She assigned projects for the kids to do. And so the kids go in and they do the projects, and it turned from we're mad that you told us this and it was wrong to we're mad that the textbooks didn't tell us this. And when you have these snapshots, now, am I okay saying that Washington was a slave owner? Sure. And let's also recognize that I believe he freed all of his slaves when he died, or all but a few. Was it just a few he did?
None of them.
I thought he did some of them. I thought it was Jefferson that didn't release any. Okay, regardless. But there you go. That's something
that's not their thing. Yeah, freeing slaves was not something that the four founders were fond of.
Okay, so let me ask you this, KJ. Was freeing the slaves normal at that time, even then? Probably not, right? It was probably very normal to pass your slaves down to your kids and family members, right?
In the area that they were, in the area in the north, it was, it was normal. Not so much in Virginia, but a lot of it, that's where the issue comes in with Washington, where people have this skewed vision of Washington, right? He was a great guy, but a lot of the promises and premises of getting the troops and the support was, hey, fight with us and we'll take care of you on the back end. We're fighting for freedom. That means every man. And that's what he sold a lot of African Americans in the North on, to support the revolution. Same thing with the British and the French. They was like, look, hey, Washington's a liar. Fight with us. We'll actually make sure you're free.
Yeah.
Long story short, both sides were lying. And then we ended up having 200 years of slavery. But that's kind of where, and that's where I say we have to tell the whole story, right? You don't have to tell all of history, right? But you can't gloss over it. Like, one of the big issues I have, like with the Florida textbooks and even in Texas, they portray slave life as, a comforting thing. Talking about, slaves were able to have days off, and what I'm saying, they were jovial people, singing and dancing and having fun. Nothing could be further from the truth.
So part of the problem with that, the biggest problem with that, is the textbooks writers.
Right.
And it goes all the way back. Like, a lot of these textbook writers, first of all, are not historians.
Absolutely.
Second of all, there are legacy textbooks. So it's like, oh, Johnson and Smith textbook. But Johnson and Smith, who were historians, didn't write any of it, or wrote the original stuff 50 years ago and haven't updated any of it. So when you have people come in, and then the states are coming in going, hey, we want certain things. So, Texas and Florida, and first of all, here, part of this too is, I am, me, I'm very cynical when it comes to certain things. So when I hear things like Florida has textbooks that tries to say that slavery was, they had days off and they taken care of and all this. I've seen some things that I kind of go, yeah, there's definitely errors in textbooks, but at the same time, there's things that. Let me ask you this, KJ: is it, and this I might take some flack for this question, just the question itself. Is it possible to argue that the descendants of African Americans today are better off than the descendants of Africa that were not brought over by slavery?
No.
It's not possible to argue that. Why not?
No. And I'll tell you why. Because of imperialism and colonialism. Africa is one of the most raped continents in the history of the world. They're raped for their resources, they're raped for their people, they're raped for everything.
Sure.
Had Africa stayed intact pre expansion of civilization, Africa was one of the most powerful nations in the world. They had all their resources. Here's where you had the Egyptian Empire, you had the
that fell.
You had literally Africa as a continent is probably one of the only self-sustaining continents in the world when it comes to mineral expansion.
I'll push back on that, because yes, where the Egyptian Empire was there, but it also rose and then fell, and so you had that everything rises and falls, right? Yes, and so when you're talking now, you could argue, and you could say theoretically, if the slave trade had not happened, what would have happened with the were the best of the best taken from Africa and sent to America as slaves? And if that hadn't happened, because now you're talking about generational, kind of like France lost something like 40%, or Russia lost like 40% of its 18 to 25-year-olds from World War I, which devastated the country.
Right.
Okay, so you could look at that and say, well, Africa lost such a large population, but
Yeah.
realistically, the numbers are not that high. Simply because I say there were more slaves in the same time frame in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. There were a multitude more time slaves in China within China itself,
Yeah,
because
but
slavery was so prevalent and the numbers were there.
yeah, but Chinese people weren't being migrated out of China.
No, and I agree.
It's the same thing that happened with the Native Americans in America. Had the Pilgrims came over and faced the full blunt of the Indian territories, they probably wouldn't have been able to settle Plymouth Rock.
Well, that's a whole different problem, because
I mean, it's all theoretical, but
no, it's not even that.
Wiped out so much.
So the problem with that is when the original Americans, okay, what do we want to call them? The first pioneers, the Pilgrims, the first settlers, the first European settlers to America.
Yeah,
they came across and they landed in the late 1600s, right? Well, Columbus came in the late 1400s, 1492, right? In that 115 years or so, the indigenous population of America dropped somewhere around 85 to 90%, right, because of those germs that we're talking about, right?
Right.
So now you can say, well, what if they hadn't gotten sick? What if they hadn't, population gone down by 90%? Would Europeans have come over and been able to take over the continent? No, probably not. But they did. And so when you're talking about Africa, again, I think that when we're talking about history and we talk about slavers brought Africans over to America to be slaves, and let's remember that I'll agree with the historians. That was very, very early. That was very, very early in the settling of America. That was hand in hand, was bringing Africans along with the earliest settlement. So slaves have been part of America since the earliest days. But so have indentured servitude. So has the dregs of Europe being sent over because they were the white trash, et cetera, et cetera. But when we're talking about the history, one of the things that is consistently left out of history is that the Africans that were sent to America were sent by other Africans. You and I know that.
They were.
But if now you want to talk about, well, let's take it everybody and look, if Africans had not participated in the slave trade, doesn't happen. It's simple. No, KJ, it simply doesn't happen.
But that's painting a broad stroke over the situation. You know what I'm saying? That's like saying, oh, the gang in my neighborhood, if you just stood up to the gang in your neighborhood wouldn't go to shit. Well, not really. So here's the situation they were faced with. But no, here's the situation they were faced with in Africa. Okay. It was like, we're coming to get people. You got two options. Either you give us people or we're taking your people. And that was the only two options those guys had.
But hold on. But what did they get out of it? They said, oh, by the way, if you'll give us people, we'll give you guns. And that will make you powerful.
Yeah, but they never traded the guns, though. That's the thing. It was a setup.
Oh, certain kingdoms certainly took advantage of that. Look at Wakanda. Look at how great Wakanda came.
No, man. So
somebody's gonna get mad at that comment, not realizing I'm totally joking. This guy thinks Wakanda's real.
But that's the whole premise, right? You can't tell that whole story. You can't. There's just not enough time.
Okay, but KJ, let me ask you this. If you're telling me that firearms were promised and never delivered, then how do you explain how can you explain that the African slave trade occurred over almost 300 years? Are you telling me that the leaders and the people that were being promised these guns and everything by mainly the Dutch were so stupid that they kept going, oh no, well, we'll give them to you next time. Oh, okay, we'll get more people. Oh, next time? Oh,
No,
okay.
no,
Next time.
absolutely not. No, no, no. The trade. So what they were trading were horses. They were trading. They were trading cattle. They were trading other things. They never
So there
gave.
was
They
still
never. Yeah.
okay, but there was still value in the trade.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
There
right.
was value in the trade.
And why? So tell me why it was okay for some Africans to sell other Africans into slavery, because that was
Well,
absolutely part of the culture.
yeah, absolutely. That's so that's the choice you got. You know, and it wasn't an easy choice. And I can't remember the
I'd be
book
curious.
I
I
read.
would really be curious to see. That's an interesting say. It's not an easy choice. I would be
No,
really, really curious. And I'm asking. Okay, this is
yeah,
not a statement. I
no,
would
you're
be
good.
curious to see what it because my guess is there's probably not a lot of actual historical on this in terms of the decision makers in Africa, whether it's the kings, with the true power brokers back there going, well, yeah, of course, that was an easy decision because we were already going to war with this other tribe.
No, yeah,
We didn't like them anyway. So of course, if we can get horses out of it and whatever else out of it, and then still and
yeah,
get that and still make the other tribe weak. Oh,
yeah.
that's a neat. I'd be really
No,
curious if that's the
yeah, no.
case.
There's actually a lot of data done
Is there?
in that regard. And so here's the thing, right? So just like you said, it's like, all right, cool. Oh, and a enemy of my enemy is a friend, right? So
Sure.
the slave traders came in and was like, yo, we know you're beefing with, hey Georgia, we know you're beefing with Alabama.
Yeah.
Here's what we're gonna do. If you capture the guys from Alabama and bring them to us, we'll give you horses and we'll give you grain, we'll give you spices and stuff, and we'll let you take that land. And then we won't mess with your people, right? Your people are
Yeah.
good as long as you keep getting us more people. So that was the trade-off, right? Do I sacrifice my people and fight these guys, or do I lay down and get down, right? With the promise that they will keep their word. And we know how that happened.
What were the numbers involved? Because you say, on one side you say it would be like just standing up to the gang. Now, there's a little bit difference because, and it could be a cultural thing, because I know that who was it? Cortez said we could destroy the entire Aztec empire with 50 men. And the reason they could do that is because the conquistadors, when coming in, they're on these horses. Right. And they're big giant guys with big metal hats and swords and guns, and they're coming into a huge population that has just died, to the point that as Cortez and them are going through, within a matter of years, there's corpses all over from death, right? And so they're going in, of course we can take this over with 50 men because we have horses. Because if you were a normal person, any race, any cultural background, and you had never seen a horse before and never seen a conquistador before, you'd think that dude was a god. Yeah. Especially when you're talking about a not very advanced civilization in any comparatively to today, any normal, whether it was, but I just look at it and I go, when you start talking about the education, what do you include? And again, I'm not opposed to including any of it necessarily. I also think it's ridiculous that history books in high school start with Jamestown. Like, do we really need a month on? Yeah, do we really need a month on Jamestown and the Pilgrims, and then another whole month on just the Revolutionary War, and then a whole another month on up to the Civil War? So how many, they have what, about 6 months in school? What's the furthest you got in a history class in high school? Do you remember?
I can't remember, to be honest with you. I think we may have made it to World War II.
And by the time you made it to World War II, you had like a week left in school, right? Yeah. So with history, and this is the part of history we talk about with history, it's important to learn history so we don't repeat history, right? We're always told that you learn history so you don't repeat history. Are we really worried about repeating slavery in America? Are we really worried about repeating, overrunning the Native Americans? Are we really worried about having another trench war in Europe? when we talk about some of these historical things, I almost wish we'd go backwards. Let's start with, if we're going backwards, because historically you also look at it as kids right now don't know 9/11.
Right.
Not really. They don't have the visceral understanding of 9/11 that you and I do. We are
Right.
first generation that knows 9/11, you and I. And now
Right.
you go back. We're losing in the next 10 to 20 years. We're going to lose those people that were alive during the Civil Rights March.
Yep.
We're losing the Vietnam War veterans.
Yep.
We've lost, for all intents and purposes, we've lost the World War II veterans already.
Yep.
So there becomes this lost value. We're going to have, I guarantee you, within 50 years, the Holocaust denial will go like this.
Absolutely.
Because you will be able to say, no, it, well, people will say anything. Meanwhile, right now you can say, well, wait a minute, we can talk to Mrs. Abramovich, who was there, who can show you the tattoo on her arm that says, I was there. Don't tell me this didn't happen. 50 years from now, probably 20 years from now, we're not going to have that. And you're going to see this. And as we dumb down school, as we go to idiocracy, as we stop teaching critical thinking, okay, so KJ, why is it important we learn about slavery in the history of slavery? Why is it important we learn today?
So from my standpoint, learning about slavery allows you to understand the effects of how society came. For me, there is no America without slavery. America was entirely economically dependent upon the slave industry. That's just fact. Without slaves, America would not be able in a position to become the world power in World War I. That's just
absolutely. I will say this: without slaves, it would have been delayed significantly if it had ever taken off. Because you could theoretically have had more Irish come over and some of those things theoretically. But I'm agreeing with you that it was a fabric of the nation. Absolutely,
and I'll tell you why. Because they didn't know how to grow tobacco in the South. They didn't know how to grow rice in the South. They didn't know how to grow that stuff. And had it not been that expertise from the agriculturists in Africa who came over to man those fields, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So, you take that piece out. Where does America go? We don't know. I mean, we had timber and we were exporting a lot of lumber and stuff like that. But I mean,
look at that. But I mean, you could realistically argue that instead of it becoming a cotton-based agriculture, it would have been a hemp-based agriculture. I don't know. That's neither here nor there. But the question, to me, and if you ask me now, obviously, I don't know. Let's go back to KJ as the representative of Black America, and I'm the representative of White America.
Yeah, as if we get a slack for that.
Yeah. And so for me, I look at it and I go, okay, so it's important to understand what slavery was because one, we need to understand the effects that it has today and culturally the reverberations that go through. And two, we have to understand that while we're not necessarily bound to repeat it, we can look at this country and say we could always do better. And when we start looking at things like the current argument about renaming the army posts or looking down on the Confederate flag and some of those things. I had a discussion with somebody last week. Should we get rid of all Confederate statues? And my answer is no. But what we should do is take them all and put them in one place and call it Traitors Park.
Yeah.
Because we don't even treat the Confederates as traitors because we bought into this idea that was immediately after the Civil War. It was started and it would continue on Woodrow Wilson. By the way, Woodrow Wilson was a huge racist. Holy crap. He's seen as this huge enlightened dude. Dude was a total racist. He was screening, under his watch, the Ku Klux Klan came back because of Birth of a Nation, and he pushed it. He was like, go Klan. Woo. But But by realizing some of those things, and here's the other part that I think maybe is it just thought that popped in my head to realize about slavery is, if you're going to say slavery is important to understand the difference in races and the challenges we have with race, it's also important not to let racism and bigotry happen in any sense. Because well, let me finish, because you might not say absolutely. I think you might, but I'm not sure everybody agrees with this. African Americans also need to realize bigotry towards whites isn't any better. There's no justice by saying my ancestors were slaves, therefore I'm going to hate white people. There's no value in that. And in fact, it's justifying hate. Oh, KJ, we've both seen the most racist people in the Army are African Americans. Openly racist.
Openly racist.
Openly racist. Are black people towards white people.
Yeah, the most unapologetically racist.
Yeah.
In my experience, and this is strictly my experience.
Experiential, yes.
The most openly racist people in the Army have been people of my hue. We just, you on that gun line, you hear some wild stuff. But like I said,
and KJ, let me ask you this. Okay, so if somebody is racial towards somebody else, and most of the time it's white towards black people, if you do something wrong, you get filed an EO complaint, equal opportunity complaint.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of somebody who is black getting EO'd by somebody who's white and it's sticking? I can't think of, in my 23 years, I can't think of one instance.
I honestly can't.
Now, that said,
I don't think I can.
All the racial stuff that happens in the Army, all the outwardly racial stuff you just said, the most blatantly racist people you see. If a white person said anything close to the level that if a white person called a black person, what's something less? What's an epitaph that's not as bad as the N-word? Give me one.
Not as bad.
Yeah, not as bad.
I don't know, man. That, I mean, you could see they're obviously
there's a few old school ones.
They go ghetto, ratchet. Ratchet was a big code word. Ghetto.
Well, even if it was something simple like monkey, right?
Yeah.
If a white soldier were to call a black soldier, hey, quit being a monkey. Oh, how about this? If a white soldier told a black soldier, quit being a thug.
Thug was another code.
Thug, right?
Thug,
okay.
Thug was huge. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that black soldier goes and files a complaint against the white soldier, that white soldier's getting in trouble for saying thug. But those African American soldiers can call that, oh, you white trash piece of shit cracker, blah blah blah, well, and nothing happens.
To be fair, that never went. It never went down like that. Like in my experience, it never went down like face to face like that. In my experience,
normally, we were in the same unit, dude. You weren't hearing the stuff. You weren't hearing stuff the chaplain was hearing then.
Yeah. I'm sure it went down. I would hear conversations in pods, right? You know, when people are with people they're comfortable with, you'd hear a different tone of vernacular. You'd be like, damn, dude, that's over the top, bro. Why are you like that?
Yeah.
You know, and I heard it both ways, you know.
Yeah.
But like I never heard somebody directly like interface like, oh, you white trash or you black, you know what I'm saying? I never seen that.
I had it. Yeah. Yeah. I had a lot of white soldiers coming in and talking to me about it and really struggling because of that. Now, we're talking about education. We're not going into this is not about race. So when we talk about education, how much of that comes from a lack of education and a lack of critical thinking and a lack of understanding why we are where we are in America? Because you and I joked about this. I don't remember if it was last time or the time before, where there was the headline a couple years ago after George Floyd, where it said, it is the worst time in history to be a black man in America.
Yeah.
The worst time. Or
But yeah,
there was
that
another one, a
was
couple,
the Black Lives Matter movement.
yeah,
And they,
it was like there was one last year or the year before that said it's the worst time to ever be a Jew in Germany.
yeah, it's like,
Really? I could probably think of a time that might have been a little worse. So if you don't understand history, you start saying and not understanding the things that really means.
absolutely, yeah,
And we're not talking just about critical thinking in terms of 2 plus 2 is 4, but we're now at the point where I don't think I've told you this theory, but okay, roll with me for a second.
let's go.
And maybe we've talked about it, but I think that you ask, and I am going to break this down kind of under political lines, okay, to have it make some sense. I think as a conservative, most conservatives, if you say, what is 2 plus 2 plus 2? And they think about it and they go, okay, 2 plus 2 is 4. Add 2 more, that's 6. Is there anything else it could be? No, I was taught 2 plus 2 is 4 plus 2 is 6. So the answer is 6. And if you ask a leftist, I'm not saying a liberal, a leftist, they will say, well, 2 plus 2 is 4 plus 2 is 6. And my teachers told me 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6, but I can't really trust the American education system because it's not as advanced as it should be. And I feel like 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 7. And because I feel like it should be 7, the answer is 7, because what I feel is more important than what I think, and it's more important than what you think.
Yeah.
And that is the American system now. You don't have Japanese people going 2 plus 2 plus 2 might be 7. They go 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6.
Yep.
It's simple. This happened on this date. This is why we learn these things. We read, we write, we learn arithmetic, we have critical thinking. We learn by rote, and they absolutely learn by rote repetition. 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And when you get into the difference of, and this is my problem when we're talking about the school system in America, we've gotten away from objective and we've gotten to subjective.
Yeah.
So you and I, we want to argue and we want to have conversations about how does history affect us now?
Yeah.
We can have those conversations. That's the great subjective part. But we're not having those discussions in the classroom. We can't even get past objective truth.
Yeah.
And when you and I are talking about some of the, okay, yes, we need broad strokes, but we can be a little more. We don't need to just go red, white, and blue. We can draw into a picture of the flag. Yeah. We can do broad strokes. We don't have to go the little dot strokes that we know exactly every point of every light, you know. But we don't even get to the point where the broad strokes that we can discuss in this country. And when you have such large percentage of people who cannot read, who cannot write, and therefore cannot critically think, and you and I both read this in Dr. Sewell's book, was basically, and again, this is going to sound bad from the white guy saying it. It's not meant to be. This is just, remember, Thomas Sewell is a black man. And he said the African-American community is the only community seemingly that allows misinformation and miseducation to be accepted. So if you have, KJ, if you have a young black student, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, and they have a white teacher, and this child says, "Teacher, can I ask you a question?" And the teacher says, "Now, little Johnny, it's ask, A-S-K, ask." You have people in America who say that is racial appropriate or racial degradation, and that the teacher has no right to change that because that is the culture of that young child.
Yep.
And it's racist. How is the English language racist by saying this is how the word is spelled and you say it the way it's spelled? Now,
Right.
you and I want to argue about should they be teaching about Black Wall Street and some of those things. Cool, great. We can talk about that all day long.
Yep.
But when you have people saying objective truth is racially wrong, math is racist, that blows my mind.
Yeah.
Math is racist.
I in that regard, I completely agree. I think, if you are taking an English class, right? And one of the things, like my daughter and I, we have this ongoing joke that just my wife just doesn't get. My daughter likes to agitate me every morning. As I walk her to school, we pass the library, right? And she knows I'm a stickler for enunciation. So she every morning she'll say, "Hey, look, Daddy, there's berries in the library," right? And it fires me up, and she gets the giggles, something awful. And I'm just, and then that kind of gives us our thing. So much so the way the assistant principal came over one day, and he was like, "Thank you." He was like, "You have no idea how often I correct students from saying library to library," right? So, and it just so happens that the assistant principal is a white guy. Like, is that offensive? Is that racist? No. I mean, I get it. So I I can kind of understand. I can understand the framework for where they're coming from when they say it's racist, right? They're reading into the underlying text of saying that you know, the way you speak, or your dialect, right? Your southern twang, if you will, is it's a part of who you are. It's your identity, and to use that, it could be racist. And I'm like, okay, that's a very weak foundation to build off of. But I get it, right?
Yeah,
I get it.
But that's the
Yeah.
argument. That would be the same argument as saying the difference between in Utah, you go and get an oil change, and
Mhm.
in Alabama, you go get an oil change.
Right.
I think there's a little bit different when you start talking about acts and very grammatically significantly
Well,
incorrect words. And here's the other part of it. Not just that certain things like that are dismissed or said,
mhm.
but and this is where Thomas Sowell says the African American community is the only one that instead of trying to correct poor behavior and poor academic outcomes, is willing to accept them and
Mhm.
promote them. Now,
So
it's not racial though. Here's the point. It's not racial, okay? Because he said so in the black community. This remember, Dr. Sewell says, "Can you prove it?"
right,
Right? Is
right.
there empirical proof? Is there something better, and opposed to what? So one of his arguments was in the book. You remember what I'm talking about? Is
Yep.
in the black in a black American culture, you have all these students, and you might have, let's say, one or two that really excel.
Mhm.
And what do all the other black students do? They say, "Oh, you're trying to be white. Oh,
Yep.
you're acting white." And they pull them back down. Now, that sounds racial until you look at the statistics in England, and the same thing happens. Those poor white bricklaying parents of kids of bricklayers of the socioeconomic, they have one or two that start, and they start going, "Oh, you're all posh. Oh, look at you trying to be all special. Why are you doing that? Oh, you piece of, oh, look at you, let's beat you up." So
Right.
you have the same kind of thing, this socioeconomic thing in England that happens the same way in America.
But you
And,
also
and
have it in America too, in different cultures, just not as I guess just not as prominent, right, or pronounced.
well,
Because
maybe, maybe
and this is
so.
where this is
Maybe so.
where this is where Dr. Sewell and I disagree. And I know that sounds crazy, but
It's fine.
his thing was, he's saying, okay, well, yeah, African American community is the only community that accepts misinformation. Well, that's not true, because if that was the case, there'd be no such thing as white supremacy doctrine. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, none of that would exist. So there is a subset of society, that crosses over all races, all genders, that says, hey, this is the standard of life, and we're going to believe it. Truth and scientific reason be damned. So in that regard, I disagree. I understand what he was saying and how he was saying it in the context he was saying it in. But factually speaking, the guys in Appalachia are just as bad, vernacularly as the guys in Twang, Mississippi. So
you've got to upload some of our early episodes, because the story you tell about your buddy
they're
from
all on.
Appalachia,
Yeah, they're all on. Yeah, they're all.
Oh, are
on.
they? Okay. That you need to cut that one. That is one of the funniest clips. Oh my gosh, absolutely, you need to clip that. So, and I'm not, and I agree with you, and I think that, but I think Dr. Sewell also makes the point that he says it's not only the Black community. What's the one thing that binds them all together is poor socioeconomic outcomes.
Right, and that was the bigger point he was trying to get at. He was just speaking from his experience as a Black male, saying, "Hey, this is our community, and this is what's wrong with us as a community."
Do you remember maybe 30 years ago? Now, I'm going to preface this by saying 30 years ago, we did not know who the messenger was.
I have to fix my mind. When you say 30 years ago, I automatically go to the 80s, man.
No, 90s. Okay, in the 90s, there was a very, very popular Black man who was the head of the most popular television show, who was a stand-up comedian, who nowadays we look and go, okay, well, we don't want to listen to anything about Bill Cosby, okay? So the messenger. But back then, you have to remember how beloved Bill Cosby was, not just in the Black community, but really in America. Okay. So Bill Cosby.
We'll talk about that, but yeah, I caught so much flack about a post about Mr. Cosby.
Oh, I'm sure you. I remember your post. I saw it. Yeah, and I knew you were going to get some flack. Oh, how dare you No, I'm not justifying it. I'm not justifying what he did, but Bill Cosby back in the day came out and basically said very much the same thing. He said, as a community, we need to black parents need to teach our kids to stay in school, to speak proper English, to pull their pants up, and to be better citizens. And he got killed for it. Yeah. And it was like, so here you have a predominant, maybe perhaps the predominant person in the Black community at the time. Again, the Cosby Show was one of the top, if not the top rated TV show. Everybody loved Bill Cosby back then. And if he couldn't go in and speak truth to power, or I'm not even sure that's how to say it. It's truth to the masses. Maybe that's the way. He couldn't speak truth to the masses. And you look at some of these things and you go, Philadelphia has the opportunity to change the school system, but they don't do it because, well, we've been doing this forever. Well, yeah, and you're failing. You have these lawmakers. When we talk about Two POGs Save the World, we say, what are the things that we can change? Yep. The first thing in education that needs to be changed is let parents have more control over where they want their kids to go to school. And the reason that gets pushed back in is because so much money goes from the teachers' unions to the Democratic Party. And as long as that money flows one way, you're not going to see changes because the public school. Now, the irony of that whole thing is how much money, in my opinion, goes to the wrong places, because you do have teachers that do a great job. I remember seeing a study several years ago, and it said, what do you give the American school system a grade? And the average was something like a D- across the country. But then they said, what do you give your school district? And the average across America was like a B+.
Yep.
So it's my school district's fine. It's everybody else that's a problem.
Yep.
And when you talk to teachers, their biggest frustration isn't just, well, we don't get paid enough. It's that we are paying to bring supplies in.
Yep.
And we're coming out of pocket to teach the kids. And school administrators, they say our biggest problem is that we have teachers that we have to retain that are bad teachers.
Yeah.
We have to, because and you have the school book issues, the textbook issues. You have students in New York City because of the union. You'll have these teachers that get accused of crimes, like legitimate crimes, and they will stay on the payroll. And there are these places where they go and they basically just sit there until their cases are heard. And these cases can take months and months, if not a year, before, oh yeah, you know what, this guy, he grew up to one of our students, and so he's going to get fired, but he's got paid for a whole nother year, assuming he even gets fired, because then it's a he said, she said, and the union's coming in. The unions, that's my biggest problem with unions. Unions, in my purview, in my opinion, unions are not there to help the average worker get better. They are there to keep the bad workers from getting fired, which is totally ironic to me, because if you get rid of the bad workers, everybody else benefits. And you just don't. So our education system, I would have loved, I wanted to reach out, I should have. I wanted to reach out to my friend Sam, who I went to high school with, who's a principal in Salt Lake City, and bring him on. I at the same time, I didn't want to put him under the, because we just don't know where these are going to go.
Where they go.
Yeah, but every teacher that I've talked to, it's really come down to, even if they support the union, their biggest thing seems to be, why do we have 4 or 5 librarians? Why do we have when you and KJ, when you and I went to school, who served lunch? The students.
Lunch. Yeah.
Well, you had like the 1 or 2 lunch.
Rotate through. Yeah. You rotate.
Yeah,
through,
you had like 1 or 2 lunch ladies who would supervise the students who went in, and we worked. And you have these schools who go out and they say, look, instead of detention these days, we think the kids should go out and have to do janitorial service. And it'll never happen, because you have the parents freak out going, you're not going to make my little Billy go pick up garbage. Why not?
Right.
You know what? You could, if you were a school and you said, instead of, and this is nothing against janitors at all, okay? But if instead of having 15 janitors on staff, if you had 1 or 2 janitors, and then you said to the students, we'll pay you minimum wage, so you don't have to go get a job somewhere else. So for one period, for 1 hour, you can get paid $8 an hour for that one hour a day and get some job experience. The school would be clean. And especially the most, if you want to really educate some kids, the ones that are seen littering, if I'm a teacher and I see some kid who throws something down I'm like, dude, you're not going to be suspended. You're not going to go to detention. I'm going to give you an hour of school cleaning after school. That's your detention. Go in and again, nothing against the lunch ladies, nothing against the janitors, but do we need 4, 5, 6, 7 administrators? Do we need 3, 4, 5, and on top of it, 3, 4, 5 vice principals? Do we need all the librarians and the media specialists? Do we need all the extemporary? Look, and if you show me we do need that, then great. I'll readily admit I'm wrong. But I also see a time coming where this education in America is essentially going to cut out teachers from teaching. And I don't think it's going to be a bad thing if you can do it right. If we can get the algorithm right, what I foresee 20 years from now is a student still go to school, because you need that social action. Okay. So you'll still go to school. The student will sit down in front of a computer, just like we're doing, and it'll say, I'm here. And your AI instructor will say, welcome, KJ. Let's go through your classwork today. This is what we have for history. This is what we have for math. And it will start teaching you, and it will accelerate you or decline your learning speed based on you. So it'll also, so let's say KJ, instead of, you and I both know this, and the Army's like this, high school's like this. It teaches to the dumbest person in the class.
Yep.
Okay. So if you're sitting in front of a computer and you have an AI instructor, and it's saying, KJ, you're really good at history. And because you're good at history and you're interested in history, instead of the normal coursework that I might give you, that instead of going in and saying, hey, I'm going to teach you about the Civil War, I'm going to really go into some depth with you. And you lead, and you're really interested in military. So I'm going to go into the Civil War and start teaching you some of the battles where, Jenny, she's going, I don't care about the battles of the Civil War at all. But she's really interested in the Renaissance that happened in France. So AI is teaching her about the Renaissance in France and the fashion and the things that came out of France because of it. And a third student's learning that, and a fourth. So everybody's kind of learning algebra. You're not good at math at all. So it's going to go a little bit slower. And it's going to go, okay, KJ, you're not as good at putting the numbers together. So let's slow down for you. But you need to learn, you really still need to learn the basics. I see school going that way. And now what teachers going to do, teachers are going to be in there so that they'll make sure, one, everybody's logged in. Two, hopefully what will also happen is that the interactive classes like band and the arts and PE and all that actually become time for socialization and become learning how to work with each other and how to. I would love to see gym, instead of gym being dodgeball, gym being, hey, we've got an obstacle course, army type obstacle. You guys need to critically think, how do you get people across? Get everybody across the monkey bars with 4 ammo cans or 4 weights and a rope. But for now, and then the other question is going to be, are Americans going to accept that? I think when it happens, the Japanese will be like, oh, we're in. If we can get AI doing it. Yeah.
Have you seen the there was a social media clip of the guys using AI analytics and it tracked everything to the children's distraction rate, the whole 9. Like, it was bananas.
I've seen it in terms of tutoring, but not in terms of a full school. It would not surprise me if there was a full school like that.
They are kicking our butts in terms of education. And that is a dope concept, man. The more I sat back at first, I was like, what? AI? No way. And then the more you kind of broke it down, I was like, yeah, that could work, because it gives a more individualized approach, right? And it cuts down on distractions. Like, the teacher doesn't have to slow down to, all right, Johnny, for the 80th time, 2 + 2 is 4, while 80% of the class is like, we get it, why are we waiting on this?
And here's the other part. I can teach you, KJ, in your class, and I can say, let's talk about the color red. And red is a primary color, as are blue and yellow. So those are the 3 primary colors. Okay, now pause. El primo es coloros, es verde. I don't remember how to say blue and rojo and but that's a big problem, is that teachers now have to stop and teach the exact same lesson to Spanish students. And I get it. This is Latino Heritage Month. I love Latinos. Come to America all you want, as long as it's legally. Come on in, great. But you and I have talked about this too, where 10 years ago, when there were these massive marches in like Los Angeles, and they're marching down the street with Mexican flags. And it's like, you're protesting to stay in America, but you're all running around with Mexican flags. Wait a minute. Like, I would have loved to see that protest with American flags. You want to stay in this country and learn in this country and be in this country? Great. But you're doing it with Mexican flags? You're defeating the purpose. And that's where I don't get it. Like, you want to come to America. Look, if I go to Taiwan, I lived in Taiwan for 2 years. I was expected to learn the language. If I go live in Norway, guess what? I'm expected to learn Norwegian. If I move to Germany, if I move to Kenya, if I move to Saudi Arabia, if I move to Japan, if I move to England, I'm expected to learn English.
Yes, weirdly enough. Yeah,
weirdly enough. And if you go to England and you start saying things like, I'm going to get on the elevator, you're going to be corrected. And they're going to say, excuse me, sir, it's a lift.
Mm-hmm.
Right? you're going to be corrected just the same. So yeah, can I get some some French fries? No, sir. You can get some chips.
Chips. Yep.
Oh, can I get some potato chips? No, sir. You can have some crisps.
Yep.
Oh,
yep.
I'm gonna put them all in the trunk of my car. No, sir. You're gonna put them in the boot. Oh,
yep.
Am I? Okay. Well, I have a flashlight in the trunk. No, sir. You have a torch in the boot. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but in America, we're going and look. It's not. I look at this and I go, it's not racial. It is cultural, and we've gotten away from the common basic. And this goes back, like you want to go back to the African Americans, like one of the biggest disservices and laws that was passed, and after normal laws, the Reconstruction failure was the unwillingness to teach slaves how to read and write. And, that's where somebody like, not Booker T, Frederick Douglass, who was taught to read on the sly, right? Like imagine what's America without Frederick Douglass and what he went through in his writings, or without a Booker T. Washington, or without a W.B. Du Bois, and these different, and all the stuff that goes, without the Tuskegee Institute, all these different things that came along. And how much better, like realistically, we talk about things like the Civil Rights Act that should have been changed and the Emancipation Proclamation, all that. The biggest way that America kept the slaves down was by not allowing reading and writing.
Yep.
And now what are you seeing culturally? You're seeing it very much so, especially in the socioeconomically downturn. And that's much more in the Black community, is that illiteracy or barely literacy is accepted. Like as a culture, it's the worst thing that you can do is, like the worst thing that white culture in America could do right now is basically say, hey, if the Blacks don't want to read, that's fine. That's on them. That's probably the most racist thing you could do, is not fight for Black children to be educated properly. Now, I'm sure there are people who say, what does properly mean? Does properly mean white? No, properly means properly. Educate to think.
There has to be a sense of self-pride and self-efficacy. You have to take care of your own. If you're not going to look after you, then who's going to look after you? And that goes back to that whole family dynamic, right? Without that authoritative figure, that glue that holds the family together, that says, hey, look, this is the direction we're going. You will go to school, you will get an education. We can talk about the parameters, but this is the bottom line, guy. You're gonna do this. Like I said, without America actually getting back to that, and again, we can go into, I feel my 10-4 hat growing out of my head. It's by design, right? We don't want an educated society, because when an educated society has time to think, and when you got time to think, you got time, you have the ability to question authority. We don't need y'all up in our business. I am a firm believer in that regard. So it's by design.
Where do you think that comes from? The tin hat. And I don't think I love the line, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. Where do you think it comes from in today's society? Because I know where it's from.
I think
you ever seen that? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Because I think about to go ahead.
Have you ever seen the video of the Russian expat who was former KGB, who came to America and was like, this is how they're going to do it. They're going to dumb you down one generation at a time. And they're just going to make you think that thinking is not that important. Yeah. And that's how it's going to, all you need is one good generation.
That's it.
Because if you look, like, it's so funny, capitalism versus communism. And communism in the 20th century killed over 100 million people in the world. Capitalism, meanwhile, has pulled more people out of poverty and improved the life standard of more people than any other program in the history of the world. And it's not even close. But today you can ask the average hippy dippy dummy on the street, 15-year-old, what they think about socialism, communism, or democracy, and they'll say democracy's evil.
Yep.
We need to socialism's the way to go. It's like, really? Like, what's good about socialism? What's great about, what's good about socialism? Well, you get taken care of. You'll get taken care of. And it's like, okay, you'll get taken care of, but what does that mean? And when you see these dummies who will sit there and protest, I can't believe this corporation is unwilling to fix themselves, and society is so bad, and all this. You guys are also materialistic. Oh, hold on for a minute while I'm doing this TikTok. Let me get my drink from Starbucks. And oh gosh, let me complain about my Birkenstocks, and let me complain about this. You're complaining about freedom of speech online is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I think I have my pinned tweet is something like, people who complain that the Second Amendment doesn't include modern guns aren't complaining online using a quill and paper.
Yep.
The First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech to be not shut down by the government. When people say, "Oh, the founding fathers couldn't have possibly understood the weapons that are used." First of all, yes, they could, because they had the equivalent. They had a pickle gun, which was the equivalent of a machine gun. They had cannons.
Yeah.
They had very, very destructive.
They knew about artillery. It's not like they didn't know about artillery.
Yes. And so, meanwhile, they could envision some of these things. What they couldn't envision is that you were going to be able to literally write a letter and have it instantaneously go to the other side of the world. And or a moving picture, which by the way didn't exist, like a drawing that moved, that could same thing be transmitted across. You and I are talking right now. We're about 120 miles apart from each other. We could theoretically be watched by somebody 12,000 miles away in India right now. I think that's probably about the furthest we're away from. From Southern Australia, from Russia, from South Africa, to next door. And instead of using this power, and I think we're trying to use it for good, because we are talking about these things, and we are talking about education, we're talking about these different things. Instead of that, we use this power of communication. We use this power of not just communication, but expanse. And we use it for porn, and we use it for hatred of each other. We use it going on the comment section of one. You should have known better. Instead of saying, "Hey KJ, I don't understand why you would sit down with this guy. He sounds like he's got some really, racist ideas, and it sounds like he's trying to justify some of these things. Like when he said this, I don't have that point of view because this, and this. It's just, you should know better." Now, I am more than willing to engage with. I love anybody who wants to engage with me. I will engage. Now, we talked about this, I think, last week. Objectively, we will. Talk. And that's why when you and I talk about things like in the Army, we're not talking about the Army as racist as a whole organization per se. What we're saying is, experientially, this is what I've seen. You've seen things. I've seen things. Other people. I was doing an EO, which is, again, equal opportunity, and the EO rep was Hispanic. And somebody had been talking about how a drill sergeant had made him get their room spick and span. And we're talking, and she comes back and she says, "Hey, everybody, I just want to pause for a minute. I don't think it's okay to use that word." And everybody, this was during COVID time, so it was online. And people are like, "Well, what word are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, I don't even want to say it, but I don't think it's appropriate to use spick in this conversation." And it was like, wait, What? Are you serious?
Right.
That's nobody's.
Yeah.
That's like saying you can't say the country Niger
Yeah.
because it's too close to something else. There was one back when Marion Barry was in Washington D.C. or actually it was just before Barry.
Did you Marion Barry?
Marion Barry, Marion Barry, what a baller, man! To get caught with crack and prostitutes, go to jail, come out, and then get reelected.
And he get reelected like a man.
Good for you. But one of the aides in D.C. was talking about budgetary and how the money is spent. And he said, this aide, and he was a white man, and he said, as a organization and as elected officials, we need to be making sure we are as niggardly as possible with the funds of the district. The word niggardly means to be careful about spending, to not spend, just all over the place, but to be very, very considerate and careful about your spending habits. Miserly, niggardly are basically the same word. Miserly and niggardly. This guy had to resign because he used the word properly, because it sounds too much like the racial epithet, right? So if you say, and I've heard people get on other things like, I've heard this one. You can't say, and this goes, and again, this goes to education because we're talking about proper word use, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just making a racial, but something like calling a spade a spade. And I've heard people say, well, that's racist because spade has been known to be a epithet towards African Americans, and it's racist. You can't. It's called, if you're black, you're black. Calling a spade a spade. It's like, that's not where it came from. It meant calling a spade means it's a shovel. Calling a spade is, instead of calling a spade a rake or a hoe or a other tool you use in the garden, it means calling a spade is you don't need to call it a shovel. A spade is a spade.
Yep.
And so we get into these arguments about education, and we get into these different things, and we go, why is it so, and I keep going back to this, like, why is it so wrong to just say, let's teach why things are important. Let's teach, like somebody goes, oh, I'll never use algebra in my life. Algebra is there to teach you critically to think. It's not to find out the Pythagorean theorem. If you don't know the Pythagorean theorem,
you're good.
It doesn't matter. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Are you really going to do that? Probably no. Unless you're woodworking, no, probably not in your life. Very rarely. But being able to figure out why A squared plus B squared equals C squared is why. English.
A spade. I had to put it up there.
There you go. That's what it was. It's about a shovel, right? So when you're talking about these things and you're talking about learning in school, I've heard this happening in some schools, getting away from some of the more advanced math classes that aren't necessarily needed, but replacing them with, how do you balance a checkbook? What does APR mean? The fiscal responsibility. We have lost that. When we don't have things like woodworking and tool shop, we lose something in our schools. When we don't have the arts, when we don't have musical instruments. I was not I played flute when I was in 4th, 5th, 6th grade. I know, shocking, right? I wish somebody had shown me Jethro Tull. I would have been like, Jethro Tull's awesome. But there's some value in learning how to read sheet music. There's some value in learning how to sing. Should I think singing should be more important than math? No, not on a basic core level. But should you be able to learn how to sing in a chorus so that you're matching and learning how a group is more powerful together in voice than an individual? Yeah, that might have some value. So our school systems need to change, but no matter what the school systems change, no matter what the school systems do, and I think you're going to agree with this, the number one thing that determines whether a student is successful or not comes down to how engaged the parents are and how much they participate in their child's life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unequivocally. It's one of them things where, and then too, I think a lot of that goes back to, well, why did they take those functions out of the school system? And I have my own theories, but again,
If
that would cause me to put my tin hat on. You know, I
if
just
if you could have a camera just like this in your kid's classroom up in the corner, so you could log in at any point and listen to what was being taught and how the kids were acting, would you say yay or nay? And only accessible by password to parents of that or guardians of that the children in the class. Really, it's a hard question for you.
It is.
I want it. I want access. I want to not only see. I want to see not only what the teachers are teaching. I want to know how my kid is acting and reacting to the other students.
I hear you, and a part of me agrees with that, but another part of me is like, I have to trust, right? In society, we have to have a trust, right? I have to trust that the teacher's going to do the right thing. I have to trust that my kid is going to be the best representative of me when he's away from me. If I have to watch him, then that's, I'm not doing my job as a parent. You know what I'm saying?
So what I mean by that is, though, have to. I agree. That's a problem. But like, do I want to be? Would I like the old Reagan saying, "Trust but verify"?
Absolutely.
And I
just
know
be able to pop in to check and see.
Yeah. And I know if I go, and the problem is, if I go into my son's or daughter's class, they're not going to act the same way they normally do.
Yeah.
And so, yes, if I could go in and they had a one-way mirror behind the classroom that I could go in and sit and just watch from there, okay, cool. I would do that. I'm not talking every day, but would I like to once in a while just drop in and be like, oh, I wonder what they're teaching Alex today.
Yeah.
I wonder what they're asking. They're talking to little Jenny about today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to. And it's not. And here's the other part of it is when a kid tells their parent, I don't want to go to school. Well, why not? I just don't like it. Well, why not? And you start talking to them and you find out that it's because, Johnny keeps coming over and poking little Jenny.
Right.
And pulling her pigtails or her braids and whatever. Okay. Have you told the teacher? Yes, they won't do anything. Okay. Now, I want to be able to go on. And I want to be able to see what's going on. Because I do want that protection. I do want that protection of my kids. Because kids, let's be real fair. Most kids at some point in their education are an asshole.
Absolutely.
Almost every kid at some point is a jerk, is a mean, is a whatever. So when I see my son struggling and I say, what is it about these classes? And he says, well, nobody likes me or they yell or blah, blah, blah. And I would love to be able to go online and go, is that just the teenager perspective? Like you've got two little raptors.
Yeah.
So it's probably very different from seeing your high schooler or near high schooler, junior high schooler, probably very different than a child who's in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Or a child who's in 4th or 5th grade. And so I think that for me, I'd like to see it. Now, if you don't want to see it, cool. You wouldn't have to. But that's where I'd like to see the option.
Yeah, I mean, there's a case to be made both ways, right? You can, you can very easily say, yeah, absolutely. Hey, one, it gives the teachers accountability. That way a teacher can come back and say, hey, your child has been acting up. Here's a snippet of when he did this, when they acted up in class. And then 2, it also gives the parents who can't necessarily take off work, or can't get out of the house or whatever, they can pop in and still be able to check on their kids as well. So I mean, there's benefits to it, but then I look at the events of Florida, right, where you have the parents who are uh, overbearingly taking over the school boards and just being pains in the asses, taking over. I can see that being an issue.
Let me time out on that real quick. And the reason I want to time out on that is the idea that the Florida school boards are any more intrusive than the
No, no.
Connecticut
Not at
school
all. Yeah,
boards
I just happen to use Florida. Yeah, I just happen to use Florida.
I happen to think that smaller government, I would like to see the Department of Education go away. Because here's the thing. If you don't like what's being taught in Florida as a parent, you can move. If you don't like what's being taught in Connecticut, you can move. I go back to states' rights and the 10th Amendment. If it's not in the 10th Amendment, it's a states' right things. And I do think that ultimately you can go all the way down to, so KJ, we're both here in Augusta. You're in Grove, or no, you're now up in Columbia. But if I don't like what's going on at Grovetown High School, and I want to send my kid up to Evans, I can do that. If I don't like that my kid is getting educated by somebody in Evans, I can say, all right, well, we're going to put you in a private school. If I don't have the money for a private school and I have other options by going, I can go and look at Sale and go to that school, which is a charter school. I'm going to choose to do that. We went and looked for my youngest at Sale, which is a charter school, and we got accepted. But then we started asking about it. And some of the parents that had their kids in Sale were like, we pulled our kid out of Sale because of this, and this. And we went, oh, really? Oh. So even though it's a little bit closer to the house and a little more convenient, and I do like that it has some art stuff, at the same time, the education was lower. So my whole thing with education is I want more options. I want to be able, and that's where I think AI is going to dominate. And I'd love to see, when we're talking about the Department of Education, and you hear things like, there's not enough money, we need more money in the school system. Go read Gladwell's book about school education, because there is no difference in money. There's just a point where you don't get any more return on investment. And you look at a school like Utah, a state like Utah, that on averages spends somewhere around, because of how many students there are, somewhere around $8,000 a year. And they have way higher grades than some of the, like New York, which is one of the highest. So what is it? Is it the teachers? Is it the culture? Is it the books? It's got to be something, but it's not money. Because when you start looking at New York City and the number, I believe it was somewhere around $18,000 per student in New York City. How in the world can you say that's a better education when all you're doing is spending way more money? Or Philadelphia, and you just, they can't read or do math.
A lot of that, I believe, the issue is so they're budgeted for $18,000 per student, but it doesn't work that way.
Philadelphia school district, 13,200 per year.
Yeah.
Okay. In Salt Lake City, $9,000.
Yeah. So they say that's 40, how much it costs to educate a kid a year, right?
So 40, and Utah is 50th out of 50 in state spending.
Yeah.
And if you want to go look at average test scores, Utah is right in the middle. I'm going to go look by state. Let's see. Ranking. I guess it depends on what you use. But like Wisconsin's number one. Oh, Utah's number 4, according to learner.com. States with the highest SATs. Utah's number 4. New York, which spends a ton, is number 31. There's your favorite. West Virginia's at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna ask you.
Final thoughts. We gotta have final thoughts.
Oh shit, yeah. Out of Utah and New York, right? How do you think that money is spread more equitably in Utah than it is in New York? And the reason I ask is because they can budget, they can go to the state and say, hey, look, it's gonna cost us $15,000 per student a year, right? To teach, right? And then I go and I look at my schools and I say, okay, well, this school is performing better than that school. I know I'm supposed to give each student here $15,000, but I'm gonna cut it to $7,500 here and give it to it. And the only reason I bring that up is because when I was in school in the Atlanta public school system, that was a huge scandal behind that, where the school district was getting money allocated for the students and then repurposing it for all kinds of bullshit. So what you had is the top 3 or 4 schools in the district had a bunch of stellar performers, and the bottom 8, which I was unfortunately in, we had to make do. And it wasn't it, and had it not been for a really dedicated teaching staff, I don't know if I'd have came out of it. It's just we made it out of sheer spite. Matter of fact, my school was voted one of the worst schools in Atlanta 3 out of the 4 years I was there in my high school. And it's just, it's just what it is. And so they get the budget. Absolutely. I get it. But, where it can be manipulated, it will be manipulated. And
oh, sure.
That's just,
so I just looked it up. The average teacher salary in Salt Lake is about $56,000. In Philadelphia, it's about $62,000. So there's a $6,000 difference. Now, cost of living and all that stuff. Got it. Right.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about how to best utilize the funds, how to best utilize the abilities of the teachers, to best utilize the skill sets, I think there's a few things that go into this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems, you said equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest problems that we have in this country is the unwillingness, and you've seen it recently, we're going to get rid of AP classes in California because they're not racially diverse enough, right?
Yep.
So you're hurting students that do well because there's not enough representation by minorities in certain classes. Okay. To me, that is way, way, way worse than this whole thing in Florida that, they want to do African-American AP courses. Well, hold on. Why didn't they do African-American? Because there were a lot of gaps in the history. Florida was like, hey, that's fine. We'll have African-American AP classes as long as it meets us the standard for every other class. And once the AP classes went back, and remember, the AP is done nationally. They went back and they started looking at the questions that Florida had. And they went, oh, yeah, you know what? They're right. This is not meeting the standard. We need to improve the standard. Once the standard gets met, then Florida and whoever else like, cool, we're fine with it. When we don't allow the standard to be met, and we don't challenge children, and we don't allow smarter kids to move forward, and we force mediocrity on everybody else. Do you know when you finished elementary school in China, I'm going to say Taiwan because I know specifically that's true of Japan and Taiwan. I'm going to go with Taiwan. Mm-hmm. When you finish elementary school in Taiwan, you take a test. And according to that test is where you go to junior high. If you score really high, you go to the best junior high schools. If you score really low, you go to a crappy junior high school. There are elementary schools that students that take an entire year off and go to what's called bushiban, which is study school.
Yeah.
Just to improve their elementary schools. They do the same thing after junior high, middle school. Wow, where are you going to school? Where am I going to school? Are you the top tier or middle, lower? If you got low scores after junior high, you might take another year at Bushiban.
Yep.
By the time they graduate high school, they go to college and they're like, college is easy now.
Yeah.
Because the education system is so rigorous from elementary to, and the competition is so rigorous from elementary to junior high to senior high, that by the time they get to college, they're like, let's get. And those who don't go to college are still okay with being able to go into the workforce and critically think and do those things because their education is so much better than ours. So as a culture, as Americans, we need to stop being okay with crappy school systems. We need to stop saying, hey, well, let's just go with what's going. Hey, the government knows better than we do. I'm sorry. My kids and this whole argument about banning books, I have a responsibility as a parent to say my kid is not reading that book. Now, if it's an assigned book, that's different. I want them to not be assigned books that are pornographic. Let's just say obscene, right?
Yeah.
Do I think banning Huckleberry Finn makes any sense? No, not at all. You're going to ban Huckleberry Finn because it says the N-word? Let's see who's banning that. That still's on the left. Okay? There are just many times who's banning Johnny Has Two Mommies. Well, that might be conservatives on the right. Okay.
Yep.
So there's arguments for, and this whole thing of how it's being done and argued on both sides as a political thing drives me bonkers. As a parent, if you're going to assign my kid, Johnny Has Two Moms, okay, then you better be assigning something that says why, two parents is, why is heterosexuality okay? Or I don't know. It's probably a bad argument.
Yeah,
but,
I got you.
But like banning 1984, really? I mean, 1984 is against authoritarianism. That's the whole point of the book.
That's kind of why they banning it. It's like,
and then you ban it as authoritarianism. It's crazy.
Yeah.
We want to improve race relations, so we're going to ban Huckleberry Finn.
Yep.
What? The whole point of Huckleberry Finn is that Huck realizes that Jim is more than just a slave.
Yep.
The whole point is Jim going, this is a person. This is a human being. He is not just Jim. Yep. He's not the N-word slave.
But that's the pendulum I was telling you about. It's swinging too far.
He is Jim the man. Yep. So, okay. So to wrap up, everybody go read Huckleberry Finn. Everybody go read 1984. If you're a single parent, do everything you can to have somebody in your kid's life that can act as a mentor for whatever gender you aren't.
We support coaches.
Support coaches. Well, your daughters, you know what? Yeah. And if you're a man raising your kid, find a wife. No, I'm a man. Find somebody that can teach her the positives of being a girl. It's okay to be, and here's the other thing. It's okay to let your kid excel. And if your kid is struggling, then help them to excel. Yeah. Put them in the best situation they can. But don't demand somebody else be pulled down if your kid needs a hand up. And I think maybe that's the biggest thing in our culture is we pull people down instead of you're going up, let's get you up, and then let's follow you up the path that you're making.
There you go.
Great. But instead we go, nope, if my kid can't go up, neither can you.
Yep. That's it.
So
that's it.
That was an hour and 43. How do we talk for an hour and 45 minutes like that?
Another day down.
I don't know if
bring back the trades in the school systems. Bring back the trade.
And just for the record, maybe we need to start breaking these longer ones into half and halves. I don't know. Maybe that's an idea. Find a natural point and just drop it in half. But hey, brother, we missed last week, so we went long this week. Come up with a topic for next week, and we'll do it because I don't think there's a natural topic for like next week. But Same bat channel. We'll see about the
That-
bat time.
Plus or minus, we'll be here.
Yeah.
Just look for us. We're here. See you later, Chappie.
All right, brother.